Hey guys, Eric here from Tourna-mix. I hope you're all doing well. Today we're looking at drums, and it's for the song Absence Makes the Heart Go Wander. This is by Kenny Royster and Ryan Casper. Huge thanks to Kenny for providing us with this song. Kenny works out of a studio in Nashville called Direct Image Studio. I've been in person. It's a wonderful place. I wish I could go every day, to be honest, and just hang out. But anyway, he did provide us with this track, and yeah, we're very lucky. Super good recording, super pro players. Awesome stuff. Let's have a quick listen before we dive into the drums. Here we go.
Bye, I'll be back in a week, baby. Hold on, could you save my place? On my side of your bed, rock and rollin' on.
Right, okay, so again, very good recording. Let's take a look at the drums now. This isn't obviously the mix session, I've just pulled these files in, but let me play you a clip of the raw drums. And I'm going to alternate between the raw drums, and down here is the mixed drums. All right, so here we go. Here's the raw kit as it stands. So as you can hear, the raw drums sound great. You know, they sound like a really well-recorded drum kit. They sound authentic, etc. But, you know, and it's a little weird in solo, but, you know, you can hear that the mixed drums really do take it to a whole new level. Here's another quick A-B. Right, and again, in the context of the full song, the drums sound like this.
On my side of your bed, rock and rollin' on down the highway, a 5-city road.
All right, so we're back in the session. I've got the drums completely raw. The only plugins that are on are these gain plugins, which are doing, you know, some phase work. So the polarity has been inverted. If you see this plugin, it means the phase has been flipped. And so yeah, that's the snare sub, the hi-hats, and the toms. I'm not going to sort of do A-Bs there showing you the phase issues that I corrected, but that is what I did. So let's just start with those on. And real quick here, one of the most important things I did, or at least one of the things that really changed the sound immensely, was just gating out the noise or the bleed on the tom tracks. So you can see on these 3 tom tracks here, I've got this Sonox Oxford drum gate on. I did a full video earlier this month, or last month actually, sorry, on how this thing works. We're not going to really get into that today. But if I play the drums with the bleed in the mix and then simply engage these 3 plugins, you're going to hear a big sound change already. Let me show you that. Right, I mean, that's huge. Now, depending on your tastes, you may think that that was a mistake, and I'll leave it up to each and every one of you to decide for yourselves. But simply removing the bleed of those toms, because, you know, this is what the toms, when they're not playing, sound like. Right, so by simply removing that bleed, you get a radically different drum sound. So I did that first, so I'm going to just turn those gates back on. Let's take a look at the kick. So here's the raw kick. Yep, sounds pretty good. First I brought in some EQ. I'll just keep it on here, off at the start and bring it in. Right, so you can hear a lot more thump, and you know, this cut here really alleviates the boxiness. Let me just toggle that on and off. Right, just sort of tightens the sound. Then we brought in Omega N, which is like a Neve style saturation. Let's hear this. So not as big a change. It just sort of darkens the sound a little bit. It also kind of rolls off a bit of high end, so you hear less of the snare and the bleed. But, you know, not nearly as big a change as the EQ. And finally, I just added a bit of compression. You know, just sort of 3 dB of gain reduction, slow attack, medium fast release. And that was it for the kick. Here's again raw. And mixed. Let's take a look at the snare now. Here it is raw. All right, so not maybe as big a change as with the kick, but if I mute the EQ, I'm just going to leave the compression on here. It's kind of thin. Just adding a little bit of body, not making a substantial change to the sound, but I thought it sounded fine. So here's the kick and snare together. And that's where we're at so far. I'm going to bring in the overheads now. They were very, very basic. All I did is compress them a little bit, and I used this lift feature to boost the high end a little bit. So you can, sort of hear with everything playing there, it's really not that big a change. And again, that's just because I didn't really feel like it needed much. Here it is in solo raw. Sounds good to me. Super gentle compression and just a little bit of high end. That's all I did. For the toms, all I did was very, very basic EQ and a little bit of saturation. And this saturation is, again, from Kush. I'm a big fanboy. The Model A here is basically like an API kind of saturation as far as I know. And all I'm really using it for is to tame the peak values a bit. So if we go to find a tom, if we turn this thing off, here's the peak value. That's minus 13.9. And if I turn it on, sounds almost the same. It's just been lowered by about 2 dB. So it's actually a fairly gentle kind of form of clipping. Sometimes, I clip my toms way harder than that. I just added that for a little bit of peak control. I thought the toms sounded really, really good. You can hear this EQ if it's off. We're talking really subtle changes. In context of the full drum mix, the EQ job that I did was, almost not really noticeable to be honest. But I did think it sounded a little better. So that's all I did for the toms. I did the exact same thing for the other toms, and that's pretty much the full drum mix. The hi-hat was just all I did was add a high-pass filter just to scoop out all those lows that we don't need. So this is where we stand so far with the drums. They're already sounding pretty good in my opinion. Right, this is the beauty of really well-recorded material is, nothing I've done here has been groundbreaking in any way, and yet we already have a really good sound. Okay, let's take a look at the drum bus now. This was very, very small moves again. I used Novatron like I always do. I used a bit of saturation from Kush. This is the Omega Tweak. And then I added some 5K, like a shelf with the Airband from the Mag EQ4. If I mute all these plugins, we're back to this. If I bring them in, pretty subtle stuff. This plugin here sort of darkens things a bit, and then this one brought it back to life a little bit. So the change with all these three on was very, very small. But again, when things sound good, we don't have to do a lot. So you can see here on Novatron, I had the airy setting, which adds a little bit of high end, but the compression was very, very gentle. So, that's it. Here's our drum mix. All right, now let me bring in the samples. I always endeavor to mix without samples, but sometimes they're just the way to go. So if I bring in the samples now, unmute those. Let's hear the drums now. Yes, you can hear that adds, a lot of, well, it does add a little bit of volume. I'll admit that. The actual sound of the kick and the snare are louder now because of the samples. But more importantly than that is we just have that extra solidity that comes with samples, right? That extra punch, consistency, all that stuff that comes with adding samples. If I take them away again, that is a perfectly good sound in my opinion, and the only reason why I brought these samples in is that near the end of the mix, I felt like in context, the snare just wasn't punching through enough, and I just needed that extra support. So here again with the samples. you just get that snap, you know. Here's the samples on their own. Yeah, they sound terrible on their own. Samples often sound kind of funny, especially the kick. This is a good lesson actually. When you're choosing your samples, you always have to audition them in context, because that kick does not sound right for how I imagine this song should sound. And yet when it's blended in with the real kick, right, and say the real snare, it really doesn't sound at all like this. Right, so you always have to analyze your samples in context. By the way, in case you're wondering, both of these samples are from the Billy Decker drum shots. Billy Decker, you can see here, backroad kick. Yeah, they just seem to work immediately. I didn't try any other samples. They were immediately good to my ear. All right, so there we have it. We have the samples brought in. The only other thing to show is just my parallel compression here. Right, so that's blended in, and it does help. You know, if I mute it, it's always sort of hard to compare parallel compression because of the extra volume, but you can hear it just adds that extra punch and snap that we sort of are used to hearing on drums these days. And then last but not least was just some reverb. You can see this Send 42 is sending to a plate reverb. It's the toms and the snare. And interestingly enough, it looks like I've done it twice here by mistake, so we'll just pretend that I didn't just notice that. Yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. Here's what the reverb sounds like on. And, another lesson is in solo, you can definitely hear that reverb. It sounds, like more than I would think. By the way, it's a 2-second EMT plate. But, in context, I thought it worked really well. So that is the full drum mix. So, you can see that with well-recorded drums, we can often get away with very basic, simple processing. And then samples, samples help. Love them or hate them, right? I mean, some of you might be listening to this thinking, well, I prefer the sound of the drums without the samples. But, for me, this I don't know, it just sort of sounds like it works to me. And if we listen in context of the full song.
Bye-bye, I'll be back in a week, baby. Hold on, could you save my place? On my side of your bed, rock and rolling on down the highway. A 5-city road trip, and I'll be back. I'm missing you to death.
You can really hear without the samples how the sound is just gone. And even though in solo the drums sounded pretty good without them, in the context of the full mix, you just really, at least I feel like they really needed that extra support. So there you have it, guys. There's my full drum walkthrough for this awesome song. I hope you guys are enjoying mixing it. I'm super curious to see what you all do. I'm especially curious to hear what you do with the drums now that we've been talking about them. And thanks as always for being here. We'll see you soon.